Uh, well, I think we should just go ahead and get started since we're running late. The tabletop role playing panel went late because everything's going late today. So if Ren wants to come later and join in, oh, there's Ren. Go ahead and unmute yourself, Ren. Okay, sweet. Okay, time to get going. Welcome to the second annual Color of Fandom Disability Panel. I am pleased to be here today with Ren and Matricula, who are joining us for our panel. And I'm very pleased that at the very last minute, Amy and my dad decided to step in and be on the panel as well. So thanks, guys. I do have an outline, but we don't have to stick to it. It's just for my own purposes. Most important thing about color fandom in general, but a disability panel in particular, is that we create a safe space. So I have a whole list of things I wanted to go over on my outline, but if any of them are things you're not comfortable talking about, you are not required to talk. And if any of these things are making you really uncomfortable, please let me know. We'll move on to something else. The good thing about disability panels is even outside of Color Fandom, they've been popping up all over fandom conventions. LogicCon's been good about it, RepCon, just about every convention I've been to in the last few years has had at least one thing about disability. Okay, why is disability important to the Color of Fandom? Well, we focus on minorities. Not exclusively, of course, but we focus on minorities for Color Fandom. 1 in 4 Americans has some form of a disability. That's the statistic I've heard. So 25% of the population. Now, I'm sure when they're talking about, they're using a very broad definition, like everyone with glasses is visually impaired, so they account. But since we do make up 25% of the population, we're not only a minority, we're the largest minority in America. So it's very important to talk about this in regard to minority rights. I heard a statistic, again, this isn't confirmed, that 1 in 5, or 20% of the population, has some sort of mental health issue. And we will be discussing mental health here. So, getting right to it, I'm going to talk about my disability. And then what I was going to do is go around and see if the other panelists are comfortable discussing whatever disability they're here to talk about. Again, you're not required to say anything. I've broken my disability. My disability is other than wearing glasses and a few other minor things. My disability is primarily mental health related. So I'm going to talk about the things I've officially been diagnosed with, and then things I've pretty much diagnosed myself with, and then we can go around the table. My main diagnosis is paranoid schizophrenia, but I also suffer from severe major chronic depression, obsessive-compulsive disorder, and anxiety. Unofficially, I've diagnosed myself as experiencing panic attacks, I believe, I've been officially diagnosed, seasonal affective disorder, weather phobia, social anxiety disorder, and something that affects a lot of writers, imposter syndrome. So, who would like to jump in and talk about their disability? Any of the panelists? Go ahead, Madison. Thanks, Madison. Well, whoever wants to.
I'm Madison. I also go by Matricula. Either one is fine. I also, as far as mental health, I also suffer from anxiety and depression and panic attacks. But my primary thing that affects my life, it's affected my ability to work, specifically to work a normal full-time job, is I have narcolepsy, which is a neurological disorder. And if anybody has ever had any problems with sleep apnea or insomnia, sleeplessness, for short or long-term amounts of time, you know that it can be really disruptive to your body, to your mental health. And one of the things that I found so interesting is that they say on average for white men, I was looking at some statistics about it, it takes about 7 years to get a narcolepsy diagnosis, and that just gets longer for women and longer for people of color, and certainly it's for people that struggle with medical coverage or medical access, because a lot of these disorders take, not just narcolepsy, but I'm sure other people will speak too, it takes a long time to get a diagnosis because of the amount of things they have to rule out. And one of the other things is it can make you feel like a hypochondriac. It makes you doubt yourself, and sort of learning to take your own illnesses seriously. Not that they don't have funny things about them sometimes, as we deal with things in different ways, either with dark humor or not, or whatever winds up working for you. But that's been something that's affected my ability to work a normal full-time job. I was doing biofuels research, which I love, but now I work a lot in a week. But it's a lot of side hustles because you have to learn how to. I'm sure we'll talk about this some too. Coping with living with your illnesses in ways that trying to find ways to manage them, because these are things that we live with, and a lot of them are treatable but not necessarily fixable. So that's kind of my experience. I also have a lot of sleep paralysis. If you've ever experienced it, it's like your mind wakes up but your body is still asleep. So when I was 8, I was dead convinced I'd been abducted by aliens. And I am not a believer in supernatural alien abduction in the sci-fi sense, but I have a lot of, um, I believe in the phenomena that people experience. There's a lot of crossover between sleep disorders and paranormal, and that's been something for me that helps me take other people a lot more seriously, whether or not I necessarily believe in the causes. The experiences are very real, and that's something that's really helped me empathize with other people, because it doesn't, I don't need to have the same belief as someone to respect that they've had some kind of experience and recognize that it's similar to mine.
Thank you so much for sharing. My grandfather had sleep apnea, and we will definitely be talking about treatment. We're going to be talking about workplace accommodations. We're going to be talking about people who need government assistance. I am currently self-employed, and I spend a lot of time taking care of this guy back here, but I do not have what's known as a regular full-time job. And for various reasons, but we will be talking about all these things. But what I'd like to do next, to see if there's someone on the panel who'd like to join in and share, I think, Ren, would you like to go next? Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm happy to go next. Hi, I'm Ren, and I always say this because I forgot to put it in my name. I use they, them pronouns. I have kind of, between myself and family, lots of experience with disability, and then because of that, I went into it, and that was my first career, my first line of work was working in disability. So this is Lucy. Sorry, she wanted to say hello. Lucy was like, I have things to say.
Well, Lucy's willing to be on the panel too.
Yeah. She puts up with me. That's her disability. I did a lot of job-connected disability work, but also helping people sign up for Medicaid waivers. But I did a lot of help guiding folks through accommodations. I personally have been diagnosed with anxiety, and then I'm in the process of working on ADHD and autism diagnoses. Even just being connected, I follow a lot of pages and have a lot of friends with these diagnoses, and I've been dating in a polyway for about a year now, and dating other neurodiverse, neurospicy people who have gotten these diagnoses has brought me a ton of peace, because it's made. I told my therapist that I feel like everybody else got some like rule book for life, and mine got lost in the mail. And like, those diagnoses, just as an AFAB person, assigned female at birth, for those who are familiar with the lingo, since I am non-binary, it's very tricky, like was said earlier, to get diagnosed with things as an AFAB person, especially when you're like doing too well. So I like did well at school and those kind of things. So, but friendships and a lot of that relationships were always really challenging. And I feel like there were so many times I could tell later I had messed up, but I didn't know why and I didn't know what the right thing was. And autism and ADHD and what I've read and come to understand about both of them really have helped me make sense of the way I just understand the world in a different way. And I often just connect really well with people with those diagnoses. But really quickly, the way as a young person I connected with disability is that my dad has had at the time undiagnosed manic depressive disorder and experienced 2 strokes at the age of like 34, the second of which was pretty major. And I mean, he has come back, he like completely rebuilt his life, but they figured out the manic depression because they misdiagnosed him with post-stroke depression. It was a big mess when I was a very small person. But seeing him go through those challenges and seeing my family go through that really, I think, gave me an empathy and a connection to the disability world. And it's probably, even though I didn't really understand it, it's why I went into that work. And I've always really connected with other folks. I work primarily with folks with mild to moderate intellectual disabilities. And I just, they're a group of people who are rendered invisible, but are folks that I just really connected working with, and like not in a pitying way. And I just like, we really connected and vibed, and I just really enjoy volunteering and doing stuff like that. And again, not in a pitying, but in a like, no, you're a person, you're an adult. It's the society that screwed up you. So,
Absolutely. What I was going to say is, before I started my business, I was still unable to do full-time work. So I did a lot of volunteer work. I'm glad you brought that up. I was misdiagnosed. A lot of people get misdiagnosed. Mm-hmm. And my ex-girlfriend was bipolar, so I know all about dating people who also have these sorts of illnesses. And one thing you mentioned, I had a teacher, bless her heart, she was a wonderful woman, but I came out and said, I have schizophrenia. Mm-hmm. And she did not believe me because she goes, that's not possible. You're so smart. You get such good grades. You work so hard. And bless her heart, that has nothing to do with having schizophrenia. But
well,
you mentioned
she was what I guess was from horror movies or something.
No, in horror movies, schizophrenics run around killing people. We may touch on that too. But no, yeah, exactly. There are all kinds of stereotypes about disability in the media. We could do a whole panel just on that. But
the last thing I forgot to toss in there is the most recent addition to my disability world is my kiddo, who's 8, also non-binary, just got diagnosed with anxiety. Unsurprising, both their parents have anxiety. Sorry, kid, genetics. And dyslexia. So we are working on, and they're in 3rd grade, so it's a lot right now with the dyslexia and getting that addressed. But, so yeah. Disability, it's everywhere.
You mentioned Medicaid. I'm glad you brought that up because what I was going to say is one of my obsessive compulsive symptoms is an obsessive need to watch the news. It used to be mainly to watch what the weather's going to do, but we'll get into that. But I didn't do it this week because I wasn't going anywhere and I had too much prep work to do. But the good news, I saw the news that looks like they're going to pass Medicaid expansion in this state. And it's about time, but
that is the 20th state. 20th state to do it.
20th state out of 50 states. I don't do math in my head to know exactly what. I think that's 40%, but
yes,
not enough. Okay, time. The next thing, either Amy or Dad, if you want to, either of you, go ahead, Dad, and then we'll.
Yeah, my name is Justin LaPointe, and I'm John's dad. I'm 76 years old. I was born in the 1940s, but I grew up in the 1950s when knowledge of mental illness was pretty bad. I mean, it was kind of non-existent. I eventually got diagnosed with depression and obsessive compulsive disorder. I don't even know if they had a word for obsessive compulsive disorder in the 50s. But I was also what you call a hider. My family was very academically oriented, and we were expected to make good grades. My older brother is brilliant, and of course, he made good grades fairly easily. I struggled. I had trouble learning to read, which really upset my parents. But anyway, interestingly enough, I also have sleep apnea and, of course, anxiety. Anxiety is a trigger for a lot of other symptoms. Anyway, now I'm in my, quote, golden years. I have mobility issues. So, the fact is, it was really rough for people with mental illness in, well, actually, both John and I had problems in the 50s and the 80s. I worked from the time I was, I'd say I was 18 until I turned 70, and wasn't fired from any job, though there were some who would have liked to do it. I was a parish minister for over 30 years, which is a demanding job, unlike what some people think. Oh, you just work on Sunday morning. Not so. My parents told me I should be a teacher, and late in life, I was about 50 when I took a job as an instructor at a community college. What I always wanted to do all my life was to be a cartoonist, which I am at the current time. Anyway, as an older person, I have mobility issues, and I've learned firsthand what it's like to have mobility issues. Most people, we've gone to conventions, in North Carolina, and most people are very considerate. They see you with a rollator or a cane, and they try to be helpful. Other people are totally oblivious to what you're dealing with, and you have to watch out for them. John and I were at, Mad Monster Con. And, like I said, most people were considered, some people were in Fantasyland and didn't pay attention to what was going on around them. So I had to look out for them. One of my pet peeves is people who do not have mobility problems parking in handicapped parking places, because I do have one of those hanging signs, but many times those spaces are all taken up because there are a lot more older people. The baby boomers were a huge generation, are a huge generation.
I'll say something to piggyback on what Dad said. I'll put in kind of a plug for GalaxyCon. They did charge for wheelchairs in 2021 when we went last, but the fans were so nice.
Yeah.
The elevator, and if you've ever been to the Raleigh Convention Center, it's horribly laid out. There's no way to get from the top floor to the bottom floor directly. So, but the elevators were reserved for people with mobility issues, people assisting people with mobility issues, and couples with kids. Everyone else took the escalator, which I thought was very considerate for that. Okay, Amy, if you're comfortable, unmute yourself and talk about your disability.
Yeah, definitely. I was officially diagnosed with epilepsy. I had my first seizure. It'll be 7 years. June. I had it 2 weeks before my 30th birthday. So, fun birthday gift. So it's been a road ever since. My seizures got pretty worse during COVID. Not because of COVID. I think my brain just went haywire. Amongst everything that went on that year. So I went through kind of almost a year and a half, 2 years, at Duke getting tested to find out that I won't ever be officially healed. There's no cure for epilepsy, but they thought doing the test they could actually find the part that was causing my seizures, but it couldn't, unfortunately. I did get a device put in, it's called a DBS, which definitely helps my seizures, and thankfully my seizures, since it's been more than 6 months. Woohoo! But it's something I'll be living with. Hopefully they'll find a cure one day. So that's a big part of me. I'm like John and his dad. My dad lives with me. He is disabled as well. He has depression, pulmonary issues, sleep apnea. I like how you brought up, Mr. LaPointe, just people's inability to be aware. Like I said, it's not me, it's my dad. My dad's on a cane, he's 6'5", so it's even harder for him to get around. So when people aren't conscious of what's going on around them, it really affects them in a big way. I'm also very passionate about OCD and how that's been deemed incorrect for so long. It's like a term that people just kind of blow out casually. Because my brother has OCD. He was diagnosed back in middle school. Still has it. My mom's grandmother, my mom, my uncle, all bipolar. So it's a big thing in my family. But personally, epilepsy is kind of my personal battle. And somehow both sides of the family, only one I got it. So don't really know how that happened. But yeah, I have, that's kind of my role.
Thank you for sharing, Amy. Yeah, I think that you brought up some important points. A lot of these terms, particularly mental health terms, get misused in our society, and that's an important thing to bring to mind. And as far as COVID goes, a lot of people had health issues during COVID, not even directly related to COVID. Even neuronormative people had mental health symptoms during COVID. And do people know what the terms neuronormative and neurodivergent mean? Because I don't want to be using terminology. In case anyone doesn't, neurodivergent is the new, more sensitive term to what used to be called mental illness. If I'm using that term correctly, please correct me if I'm wrong. Neuronormative is someone who does not suffer from mental illness, if such a person exists. And Donna said she's dealt with depression. And as far as I know, Donna's neuronormative, dealt with depression during COVID because all education became virtual. And I'm glad Amy brought up a lot of these conditions we're going to be talking about today, there is no cure. There currently is no cure for schizophrenia. Unless, who knows what medical science will do, I'm only 48. But there are effective treatments for schizophrenia. There is no cure for schizophrenia. With that, let's dive into symptomology. And I'll talk about mine first, and then we'll go. One of the things that causes me the most anxiety is driving. I think we all have had road rage, but people who suffer from anxiety, driving can be an issue. Things that exacerbate that were weather. I mentioned I had weather phobia. It is currently thunderstorming here. I'm in a nice, safe house, so I'm not experiencing any anxiety. But if I was out on the road, there was a time, say 2015, I couldn't leave the house in this, literally. Then I did, we'll talk about therapy in a minute. I did desensitization therapy, and now I can drive, If it's a heavy rain, I can't make it all the way to Raleigh, but, I've gotten better. Also, there was a long time I could not drive at night. I missed Donna's party, things like that. Recently, we attended a play that was supposed to be 2 hours, and it turned out to be 3. Or we went to the vet's office, and they kept us an extra hour. And so I've had to learn to drive at least short distances at night again. In fact, when we went to RepCon, we all went out to eat, and the road, the restaurant was just up the road, but it was dark, it might have rained, it might have been fog. I was still able to do it. You might say, well, John, if you have all these problems, why don't you just let somebody else drive? Well, the thing is, that causes me to have even worse panic attacks. So I'm getting better. I've had this guy do some driving lately, and it hasn't made me as nervous as it has in the past. And of course, it wouldn't be an issue if I was driving at night and there was no traffic. I was driving in the rain and there was no traffic. But when there are other people on the road, you're a lot more likely to have an accident. Another thing that causes me anxiety is social situations. And like I said, I believe I haven't been officially diagnosed, but I believe I have social anxiety disorder, which is what it says. You have anxiety in social situations. And it was very hard for me to make friends as a kid. For one thing, it was the 1980s and no one wanted to be friends with a nerd. But, not no one, most people. Most of the kids did not want to, if you weren't good at sports or, whatever, they didn't want to be your friend. But I still have social anxiety in mundane situations when I have to deal with the mundanes because I have nothing in common with these people. But fandom is totally different because fandom is a place where people who are different or even weird are accepted for the most part. Like I'd say 90 to 95% of people you meet in fandom are nice.
I always tell people, John, that I don't really understand how to interact with normals.
Yeah, I don't know.
Like when I work around new people, they like it, but like I don't understand. I work in a corporate job, and sometimes I think they're discovering I'm a more diverse hire than they expected. Right. I was just like, yeah, you put me in a room with a lot of normies, and I can't promise what's going to happen.
Exactly. That's right. And I will say something in particular. Color fandom has been a very welcoming place for me, an accepting place. I'm not going to say my social anxiety evaporates during color fandom events, but it is significantly reduced from what it is when dealing with mundanes. And I think Robin said it best, that color fandom is a place where you can hang out with people who are like you or not like you but still value you. And there's a problem and we'll get into this later, that people who are disabled aren't always valued in mainstream society. It's getting better. But in fandom, at least in the last few years, there have been panels about these very issues. So that's good. I did want to point out one thing. When we discuss symptomology, you have to say that disability is a spectrum, like so many other things. And what a neuronormative person experiences in everyday life is simply mental health is an application of that. Neurodivergency is an application. For example, everyone gets sad. depression is amplified sadness. Everyone gets nervous. Anxiety is amplified nervousness. Paranoia. People get suspicious of other people. It's normal. Paranoid schizophrenia is an amplification of that. Depression. We've talked about depression. It can be a very serious issue. It can lead to suicide attempts. One thing I need to point out, and we'll get into this in a little more detail, hopefully. Disability is never a choice. No one would choose to be disabled. It doesn't make any sense. And, okay, oh wow, we're 12:40 already. You can choose to be a friendly person. You can even try to be positive sometimes. But,
You can't choose to be happy.
thank you, that was my point. Panic attacks. I think that this is something we want to talk because people have talked about panic attacks. The triggering of panic attacks is individualized. What trigger is very individualized. Some people are triggered. I don't want to go too much detail by every ordinary things that other people would think that's not a big deal. One of my favorite films. I don't know if we're supposed to say developmental disability or intellectual disability now, but one of my favorite films about that, and I don't like all movies that are about that, but is Rain Man. And because one of the things I like about Rain Man, it came out in the 80s with Dustin Hoffman. He played an individual with that type of disability. He showed number one, what a panic attack looks like. Number two, what can trigger a panic attack. He got panic attacks triggered by wrong number of fish sticks. What kind of underwear he was wearing. He didn't get to see the People's Court every day. He had a panic attack. And it showed people these can be easily triggered. Mine aren't that easily triggered. I like to watch the news. I won't have a full-blown panic attack if I do. The other issue we need to talk about is disability in children. And we've touched on this. Ren touched on it. Children can have panic attacks. I had them. I didn't know what they were called, but I had them. And the problem with a panic attack in a child is it can mimic a temper tantrum. And the child will start crying, they may shout obscenities, and no one wants to put up with a kid's temper tantrum. But if your child is having a panic attack, you should not punish a child for a panic attack. That's a symptom of an illness. And if you're not sure, is my kid having a panic attack, or is my kid, just being a brat, seek a mental health professional. They might know what it is. I've talked a lot, and I was here like 15 minutes late. So yes, Madison, please go ahead.
I wanted to piggyback off what you said, actually, especially one. This is a side pin, so I'm going to put a pin in the childhood thing, but one quick side pin talking about driving. One of the things, I have to take medications to stay awake during the day to drive. Also, narcolepsy. There's also a component of insomnia and extreme sleepiness. So the idea is not just the sleepiness, that's the daytime stuff that people see, but it's a complete dysregulation of your sleep-wake cycle. But talking about driving and being nervous driving, going down the road, and I would know what the best parking lots were on the way to work to be able to pull over to take a nap. And if I was going somewhere I didn't know, I would get huge amounts of anxiety because I wouldn't know where was a good nap spot. So it's 100%.
Yeah, it's good to know. Oh, sorry.
Oh, no, but I was saying, to piggyback off what you said about childhood diagnoses, about trying to be sensitive, whether it's, sort of normal temper tantrum or learning emotional regulation versus something that might be more appropriately treated as a panic attack or some kind of non-neurotypical disorder or affectation, having sleep issues, frequently being told how lazy you are. and sort of being people getting like growing up to people becoming upset with you for falling asleep because it's perceived as very rude or inattentive. And so learning how to kind of mask and cope with that is like you were kind of talking about, like it takes whenever we get into like talking about treatment therapy, like it can be really, like you were saying, it's hard to like, you have to take yourself seriously too, because sometimes it's hard to convince people when they're like, oh, but you're smart, how can you have this disorder, or you don't look tired, and it's like, yes, thank you, I practiced.
Yeah, we try to go for it, Ren.
I am incredibly grateful. I mean, this is sometimes a trash timeline, and I'm never going to argue against that. But I am really grateful for the progress because my kid, their dad, and I all openly talk about, we all have therapists, we all openly talk about it. We call it the feelings doctor for my kid. But, and we got, and their dad and I got my anxiety diagnosis at like the beginning of COVID, but it like surprised no one. And so we've kind of been on the lookout for them to be neurodivergent as well. Like we were kind of like looking for signs, like we weren't surprised. And their dad has depression. And so I'm not, I'm kind of like, I know that once we get closer to, because I have a psych degree as well. So neuropsych stuff has just always been interesting to me. And I was going to pursue childhood psychology for a job. So I took a lot of like kids neuropsych courses, which is very helpful in parenting, by the way, taking childhood development stuff. But we were on the lookout and we're not afraid of it. And it has been incredibly helpful to have my diagnosis when we actually had them tested for ADHD and they came out of it with an anxiety diagnosis. But we were like, yeah, okay, that makes sense. But I can't speak to the conversations that Max has with their dad, but the ones they have with me, I'm like, yeah, anxiety sucks, doesn't it? Like, let's talk about how we can roll with that. And I can email their therapist and talk with them. Like, we have so many more resources and just the ability to openly discuss it and have a name for it. Like there was so long, I'm on meds for anxiety now, and like there's so long, I just thought the anxiety I had every day was normal life. And now when I feel the anxiety, I'm like, oh, this is anxiety. This is not normal life. I can work through and process it, but it's like you don't know what you don't know. And so if you don't know, there's like, I'm sure all of y'all have seen the memes about like the funny memes about the demon coming into your body and then being like, what the hell is this? This is all broken. What is happening? Because you don't know, nobody else is in your body to be like, yeah, bodies aren't supposed to feel 24/7 anxiety. That's not great. No. And so being able to have a language and talk to them and work through like, what are you, like they have a lot of test anxiety, and of course third grade and not awesome for that. And so like being able to put words to it and help them talk through it and know like, what is your therapist saying? What is my, like having all these resources is just a game changer.
Could I
Please
suggest something here? One of the problems with being mentally ill in the past, my mother took some psychology courses in the 1940s. And basically the idea is if your child had a problem, it's the parents' fault. And
Neo-Freudianism.
yeah, I remember
Specifically the cold mother.
Good old cold mother.
Good old cold mom.
Well, she was a very warm-hearted person, but she did not listen. My dad was he was a minister, and he was trained to listen. And so I felt I could talk to my dad. When I would try to explain to my mother why I was upset about something, she would say, I'd say, tell her what was going on. She said, well, that's not rational. Well, guess what, folks? Mental illness isn't rational. We're dealing with something else. And when, I actually didn't start understanding some of my problems until John started manifesting some of his symptoms. And I said, oh, when I heard about OCD, I said, oh yeah, that's what that. And so I wasn't diagnosed with major depression until 1992. And I was very much an adult at the time.
I'd like to respond to some things that Madison and Ren had said. It makes the world of difference when you get your diagnosis and you have a term. When I was 15, even though I had textbook symptoms, they finally diagnosed me with schizophrenia, and it came from this misguided notion that you don't ever develop schizophrenia before college, which is hogwash, but that is what they thought back then. Having a name makes it. A lot of people with schizophrenia, myself included, believed that they were either demonically possessed or talking to demons. But in the old days, if you knew the demon's name, you had power over the demon. And having a name for your disability gives you some power. That's what it's called. Other people have it. Other people have schizophrenia. Other people have panic attacks. That's empowering. As far as what you said, Madison, about driving, if you have to drive on 40, which I do to attend conventions, which I love, I just don't love getting there and back, know where your rest areas are. Rest areas and red lights are your friend. They allow you to decompress. Yes. Getting lost while driving, and I'm such a Luddite, I still need to learn to use GPS. Print direction. Getting lost while driving is very anxiety-provoking. We went out, I said, to that play. The most relaxing part was actually when Dad drove, because we got lost on the way while I was driving, and then driving home, it was an hour off, and I had to drive in more darkness than I was expecting to. And the laziness, this really, excuse my language, this really pisses me off. The assumption that disabled people are lazy. The moment someone finds out, A, you don't have a full-time job, and or B, you get any kind of help from the government, the immediate assumption is that you're a lazy person stealing other people's tax money, and why can't you go out, and I don't know, we're running low on time, we may or may not get to this, why can't you go out and get a job like the rest of the world? In fact, falling asleep, I had a friend of mine who was in a wheelchair, had many health issues, who would make noises in class that sounded like she was sleeping, and the professor wanted to throw her out of the class, which violates, I don't know if I'll have time to talk about this, but violates the ADA, the Americans with Disability Act. And her daughter was really angry about it. Amy hasn't had a chance to talk about symptomology, so Amy, if there's something you'd like to say, you can go ahead and unmute.
Yeah, I just kind of wanted to piggyback two items. I know we don't have a lot of time. The first is a big thing for people who have epilepsy is driving. Some people get to the point where they give up their license. Some states, it's anywhere from a year to 6 months when you have a seizure. For North Carolina, when you have a seizure, you can't drive for 6 months. So it took me a long time to accept that when I had even the smallest of a seizure, that I couldn't drive. But it became, as the years came on, I finally to accept, it just wasn't for me. Not only to protect myself, but also to protect others on the road. So that was just kind of that process of learning to I still have the anxiety now of possibly hurting someone, but it's just something you have to work through. And the other part to anxiety, something I recently been dealing with lately is, since I've been open more about talking about, it took me a long time to talk about my epilepsy, is one part of being disabled is when you talk about more, people tend to over worry. I don't know if that's a correct way to explaining it, is when they kind of like are like, for me, it's like when people think I get too stressed, they're like, oh no, like, you need to go sit somewhere you can't, and you might have a seizure. It's when they get more stressed out, and you have to like calm them down more. And they kind of like, it goes back down here, just like, like, I'm fine. It's like, stop talking. So I think that's been a big trigger for me lately, is this, people's over worry. Kind of when you have a disability, is when you're more open about it, and when people are just kind of like overly cautious just because they don't know enough information, or they might be trying, but it's not coming off well. And it just kind of get pissed back on me sometimes, and sometimes it's difficult, because then you have to go home, you're just like, like, I just got reminded I'm broken. That's why I love your glass, Tequila, like, not broken. It's just, you have to, like, tell yourself constantly, like, you're not broken all the time. But yeah, that's been a big, when we're talking about anxiety and worry, that's been a big one, is when people just over worry. Like, people, like, you're just, a little bit, and they're just, like, overly involved,
It feels to me. Oh, sorry. No.
No.
I would say it feels to me like
wrong intentions get crossed.
Like people get very binary with their ideas. Like either you're well or you're completely broken and you need to go home. And people don't like making the accommodations for the messiness of life. Like people would freak out when I was trying to get people jobs. Like, oh no, we have to like learn to work with this person who works a little differently. We can't just have it exactly how everything is for everybody else all the time. It's like, yes, life is messy. Sometimes you work and you already make accommodations anyway. Like they're already working with people who have all different things. They just don't think of it that way. And so it's like, oh no, it's challenging for us because Amy might have something maybe someday. So we'd just rather not worry with it. And that's totally BS for them to put that back on you instead of doing the work to be like, okay, I need to just sit with this and work through my own anxiety about the situation on here. That's not Amy's mess. That's mine. It's my reaction. It's my responsibility. But people don't want to take responsibility for their own stuff. So that just pisses me off.
Thank you for, it pisses me off too. And there was a workshop where disability virtual panel I attended at a convention where someone was going on about, well, not the panelist was critiquing this, but she said she encountered a woman who went on about how uncomfortable disabled people made her. And it's like, okay, you need to get over that.
People with IDD scare people a lot because there's no pill for IDD. Like, it's nothing that can be treated. And anytime there's something, and my guess is that's part of what it is for you, Amy, because your stuff doesn't have some, like, miracle cure, that it's ongoing. That's probably part of it, too. And that really freaks out neurotypical people because they don't know what to do with it. And they don't know how to make that. It's like, oh, I have to continue making these adjustments? Yes, you do. And if you want to, and it will work, but it is worth it. But yes, you will actually have to do some work.
And like I said, it's very important to recognize the spectrum. And the disability is a spectrum. It's not institutionalized or perfectly well. I mean, I've got a friend who has the same diagnosis as I do, and he has a wife, 3 kids, and a full-time job, so he's doing a lot better than I am. Same diagnosis. He's on one end of the spectrum. People in institutions are on the other end of the spectrum. there's a whole big space in between those two things. And
We can't really go poo poo. Just what?
oh yeah, driving. If I couldn't drive, I wouldn't leave the house. And becoming recluse is very, very much a symptom of many mental health issues, and it's very unhealthy to be. I mean, the great thing about VCons is I don't have to worry about driving anywhere. But if I couldn't drive, I wouldn't leave the house. And I like seeing people in person. It was hard on my mental health during COVID, and yeah. And my concern so much when I'm driving isn't, am I going to hurt? Oh, obviously that's a concern that you're going to hurt someone. My concern is that one of the other drivers, particularly the way people drive on, say, 40, is going to hurt me. So we're at 1 minute over time. I know Donna's recording this. I'm sorry. This is partially my fault for being here late. I know you may have to record another panel, Donna. Is it okay if we keep talking, or do we need to end it here?
You all can keep talking. I am going to stop the recording, but please feel free to keep talking. This is such a great panel.
I wanted to say, I dropped a link in there for one of my favorite places in the entire world, which is 321 Coffee.